Greetings, dear ones. I'm Kryon of Magnetic Service. The group finds itself in Nepal, in Kathmandu, in a lovely monastery where there are hundreds of nuns. And before we continue with a message that may seem odd here, we wish to pause and have anyone listening honor those who were lost in the 2015 earthquake. For right where we are, the earth shook. And in this city there was great loss, both in history and in lives. Great fear, and it imprints the planet in a way that you have to clear it. And yet there is no better place for clearing than where it happened. And so just take a moment and think and honor those who literally were lost when the earth rumbled so much. Some will ask, how is it that your partner Gaia could do such a thing? And if you ask those who are here, in their sorrow, they will say the oneness of all is a circle. And things come and go appropriately, and they return. And the circle always improves itself through wisdom. And many can look back, and even through the grief, they can smile with the joy of understanding that God is good, and that those lost may even be back. It's a beautiful situation and understanding and belief that compassion creates, especially when so much of the public here truly understands it. I want to talk about something that seems strange as we sit here in Nepal. But Nepal is the home of Mount Everest. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on the planet. But it wasn't always. Because tomorrow there's going to be an air tour of the mountains, of the Everest area and the Himalayas. I wish to present something today, because many of you will look upon the mountains and wonder how those could survive, even those climbing, of the cold and especially no oxygen. There is something about the mountain that would remind you then of Lemuria. And that's what I want to speak of. I would like to fill in some blanks that I have not spoken of before on how a mountain higher than Mount Everest could sustain any life at the top. And it did. So let me review with you the story of Mu. The small continent in the middle of the Pacific was really one mountain. The planet has volcanic hotspots. Right now there are about 13 of them. And they are famous because the magma from the center of the earth is very close to the surface. This creates volcanic activity constantly and continuously. And what you call today as Hawaii is simply one giant mountain that was pushed up out of the ocean through not tectonic activity, but through a hot spot that created a bulge underneath the mantle, pushing the land up like a giant bubble filled with magma around Hawaii. The largest mountain in the world is still Hawaii, measured from the bottom of the ocean to its top. It sticks out of the ocean even today, thousands of feet. It's an enormous mountain. But when it was pushed up, it was almost 28,000 feet high. This process is not seen or acknowledged to have happened by geologists. And yet the precedent has been set in what you call Yellowstone. For today, Yellowstone is flat. But at what time? One time, it was very high, high enough that glaciers formed. And Yellowstone is a hot spot. And it had the same exact situation, where a bubble of magma pushed from below, creating mountains where today there are flatlands. Eventually, the bubble diminishes over thousands of years. Lemuria, the mountain of Hawaii, was up very high when humanity was seeded. Dear ones, I want to talk about what happened there. For we've told you that on Lemuria, before it sunk to what you call the Hawaiian Islands and receded when the magma started to go down, there was something very special there. It was almost the seeds of karmic attributes, the beginning human civilization. And from Lemuria, all manner of reincarnation occurred all over the planet. There were many reincarnated from Lemuria to India, and Nepal, Tibet, and the area you call Pakistan and China. There were no borders back then, so it was a regional incarnation. Doesn't it make sense that those who received some of the original seed information about oneness would then come to this area to continue in that reincarnation scheme and system of beauty and oneness? Indeed. But what I want to tell you today has to do with the mountain itself. Some things that I have never filled in for you. When you see Everest, it is known for something: ferocious weather. Weather that changes dramatically from hour to hour, so that climbing the mountain is treacherous, and they have to be ready at any time to stay for days, simply waiting for weather. You might then practically apply this same attribute to a mountain that's 28,000 feet high in the middle of the Pacific. But you'd be wrong. For there was no ferocious weather around the mountain of Lemuria. The Himalayas and the place where they are create the weather. And in the middle of the Pacific, there was no then creation of strange weather simply because the mountain was there. In fact, there were very little winds, only the trade winds of the kinds that are today. So there was no ferocious weather. It was easily climbable without having weather an issue, but it was cold. It was cold simply because it's cold up high. And so we've told you at the top of this mountain called Lemuria, there was something called the Temple of Rejuvenation. Lemurians did not live on the mountain, they lived on the shores. They were smart. And so they were a tropical bunch, except for the few who climbed the mountain. And the Temple of Rejuvenation has been covered in what took place there and what happened there and the reasons for it. But some would say, how is it possible that in those days you could have anyone living at 28,000 feet? First of all, where did they get their heat? There's no real wood to burn, or you'd run out of it quickly. And where did they get their oxygen? You cannot live that high. So I'll tell you both things, one of them understandable and one of them not. First of all, remember, the island was volcanic. There simply was plenty of heat. It had a caldera. Also, lava continued to flow just like it does today, building new land. Even before this mountain began to subside slowly, it still was a volcano. So there were many steam vents. There was plenty of lava all of the time. There's the heat source. Now you understand why someone could live that high, perhaps even a small support community for the Temple of Rejuvenation. That's the heat. The oxygen, that is something that someday you will discover. How do I tell you this, dear ones? When the mountain came up, it exposed a great deal of ancient sediment. And in that sediment was a discovery. Rocks that actually stored and contained oxygen. They were easily spottable and mineable. Those rocks were taken up to the top very slowly. But the problem was getting the oxygen out of the rocks. You had to melt the rocks. Now, where would you get a heat source to melt a rock? And the answer is right in front of you, called lava. And if you understand what I'm telling you, the rocks were melted in a confined area, releasing oxygen. Is it a difficult thing for you to imagine something you haven't seen yet, where formations on the planet actually would trap oxygen before they solidified? That is how they got their oxygen at the top of the mountain. There will be science someday who will come along and discover this, and then you will know that there is validity in what I tell you. So Lemuria was different than you might think. No ferocious weather around a mountain even higher than Everest. Plenty of snow, fire and ice, and a beautiful temple of rejuvenation that took its oxygen from the land. I tell you this because you're in a place with the highest mountain on earth at the moment. We finished the story, of course. When Lemuria began to subside very slowly, lives were not lost. There was no destruction. It took a long time. But there was great fear that it would subside right into the ocean. Therefore, many took to their boats, their canoes, and the rest is history. Even those who settled on Easter Island know that their ancestors came from the north, from Hawaii. So, dear ones, it fills out the story that we have never told you before. And what better place to tell you about some of the precious beginnings of that which is the Akash, than in this place that celebrates it, knows about it. The ancients who were here were Lemurian. And so it is.